frozen air bit through oxygen masks as fighters climbed toward their interception altitude. 28,000 feet above Brandenburg stretched an endless dome of crystalline blue. The morning of March 6, 1944, had dawned with perfect visibility. Not a single cloud marred the sky over Germany's heartland. Major Hans Koglers pressed his face against the canopy of his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6. Ice crystals formed on the plexiglass with each breath. His mixed formation climbed steadily through the thin air. The sound of Daimler-Benz engines echoed differently at this altitude. Thinner, more strained. Ground control had been confident in their assessment. The incoming bomber stream would arrive unescorted. Intelligence reports confirmed it. Mathematical calculations proved it. No Allied single-engine fighter possessed sufficient range to penetrate this deep into German territory and return safely to England. The radio crackled with static. Then came the words that changed everything. Achtung! Indians at 12 o'clock high! Single-engine fighters with drop tanks! The voice carried growing panic, fear that transmitted instantly through the formation. Koglers' blood turned cold despite the heated cockpit. His hands tightened on the control stick. American fighters. Single-engine fighters. Here, over Brandenburg. Less than 50 miles separated them from Berlin itself. The calculation seemed impossible. Every range chart confirmed it. Every intelligence briefing had stated it categorically. No Allied single-engine fighter could reach this far into the Reich and survive the return journey. The fuel simply wasn't there. American P-47 Thunderbolts barely scratched German airspace at their maximum range. The twin-engine P-38 Lightning might reach Hanover under perfect conditions. But Brandenburg, the approaches to Berlin itself? This violated every assumption the Luftwaffe had built their defensive strategy around. Koglers strained his eyes against the glare. Silver shapes grew larger against the blue dome. Their silhouettes became unmistakable. Distinctive squared wing tips, sleek profiles that cut through the sky with predatory grace. These weren't the stubby Thunderbolts German pilots had learned to engage at extreme range. They weren't the twin-boomed Lightnings either. These were North American P-51B Mustangs. And they moved through the thin air with the easy confidence of hunters who knew they had fuel to burn, altitude to spare, all the time in the world to stalk their prey. 730 heavy bombers of the 8th Air Force approached from the west. This wasn't another feint toward the capital before turning to secondary targets. Intelligence intercepts confirmed it. This was a direct assault on the heart of the Third Reich. The first time in the history of aerial warfare that single-engine fighters would escort bombers all the way to Berlin and all the way back. Koglers led his formation of 7 twin-engine Me-110 night fighters pressed into day service. 41 single-engine Bf-109s accompanied them. None of these German pilots understood they were witnessing the beginning of the end. Not just of aircraft and pilots, but of the entire belief system that had sustained German air superiority since 1939. The mathematics of annihilation were being written in contrails across the Brandenburg sky. White streaks that marked the death of German invincibility at 28,000 feet. The shock had been building for weeks. Few in the Luftwaffe High Command had connected the scattered reports. On January 11, 1944, Major Hermann Graf, commanding JG-11, had encountered American single-engine fighters near Brunswick, 150 miles deeper into Germany than they should have been able to fly. His after-action report suggested these fighters must have refueled at secret Swedish bases. Berlin dismissed this as combat fatigue affecting judgment, battle stress clouding perception. But the sightings multiplied like cancer, through German intelligence files. Hanover on January 29th. Magdeburg on February 3rd. Each report pushed the envelope of American fighter range further east. Each met official denial. The Reich Air Ministry issued a directive on February 15th. Reports of American single-engine fighters beyond the Ruhr were misidentifications, twin-engine P-38s mistaken for single-engine types. Friendly aircraft confused in the heat of battle. Pilots making such claims would face medical evaluation. The truth was far more disturbing than Swedish conspiracies or pilot hallucinations. At Wright Field in Ohio, American engineers had achieved what German technical experts declared physically impossible. They had extended the P-51B Mustangs' combat radius to over 650 miles, using expendable auxiliary fuel tanks. The mathematics seemed to violate basic laws of aerodynamics. A single-engine fighter carrying enough fuel to fly 1,300 miles while maintaining combat performance was an engineering impossibility. German calculations confirmed it. Fuel capacity divided by consumption rate equals range. Simple arithmetic that couldn't be argued with. Hauptmann Heinz Knocker commanded 2nd Squadron of Jagdgeschwader 11. In his diary from early 1944, he wrote with absolute confidence about their tactical advantage. We had calculated precisely. American single-engine fighters could escort their bombers 280 miles from their bases in England. No further. This gave us all of central and eastern Germany as a hunting ground. We could attack bomber streams without interference. The Americans could not change the laws of physics. But the Americans hadn't changed the laws of physics. They had simply applied them more creatively than anyone in the German High Command had imagined possible. The secret lay in two revolutionary innovations. German intelligence had either missed them entirely or dismissed them as Allied propaganda. The Packard-built Merlin engine represented the first breakthrough. The British-designed paper drop tanks were the second. The Packard Fafurt 1653 engine in the P-51B wasn't merely a licensed copy of the Rolls-Royce Merlin. It was an improved version manufactured to tolerances that exceeded even the original British specifications. Using American mass production techniques refined in Detroit's automotive plants, Packard had achieved something remarkable. An engine that produced 1,490 horsepower at sea level. More crucially, it maintained over 1,200 horsepower at 30,000 feet. The two-stage, two-speed supercharger made this possible. German engines lost power dramatically with altitude. American engines kept pulling. Oberfeldwebel Conrad Bauer was a technical specialist with JG-26. He examined a crashed P-51B near Gütersloh in February 1944. His report, discovered in Luftwaffe archives after the war, revealed German amazement at American engineering. The engine installation is a masterpiece of efficiency. The intercooler system alone is more sophisticated than anything in our Daimler-Benz 605 series. Most remarkable is the production quality. Every component is machined to jeweler's precision. Yet they tell us the Americans build 3 of these engines every hour. If true, this is not a war of pilots, but of production lines. The drop tanks represented an even more elegant solution to the range problem. Constructed from pressed paper impregnated with plastic resin, these 108-gallon auxiliary tanks weighed just 35 pounds empty. Lighter than the ammunition for one of the Mustang's machine guns. British engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment had developed the laminated craft paper construction method. These tanks could hold fuel for approximately 5 hours before beginning to break down from fuel seepage. More than sufficient for the 2.5-hour flight to Berlin. German engineers had experimented with auxiliary tanks, but their approach reflected a fundamental philosophical difference. German tanks were metal, reusable, expensive, heavy. They degraded performance so severely that fighters carrying them were vulnerable to attack. American paper tanks were cheap, disposable, light. A P-51B with two 108-gallon drop tanks could fly to Berlin, jettison the tanks in seconds when entering combat, and fight with full performance. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke commanded the 56th Fighter Group. He explained the tactical revolution in a 1944 briefing to new pilots. The Germans expected us to husband our fuel, save enough for combat, and return. But with drop tanks, we could burn fuel like millionaires, cruise to Berlin on the external tanks, drop them when we saw trouble. Still have our full internal fuel load for 30 minutes of combat at full throttle. Plus, the entire flight home. We weren't flying on the edge anymore. We had margin to burn. To understand the psychological impact of March 6, 1944, one must first grasp the trauma of October 14, 1943, Black Thursday. The 8th Air Force had attempted to bomb ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt without long-range fighter escort. Of 291 B-17 flying fortresses that crossed into German airspace that day, 60 were shot down. 138 returned damaged, a loss rate of 20.6%. Casualties exceeded 600 airmen. The Luftwaffe had demonstrated with brutal efficiency that unescorted daylight bombing was unsustainable. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, was forced to suspend deep penetration raids entirely. For 3 months, American bombers stayed within range of fighter escort. General Major Adolf Galland, General der Jagdflieger, declared October 14th the greatest victory of the Jagdwaffe in the defensive war. In his post-war memoir, The First and the Last, he wrote with confidence about the strategic implications. After Schweinfurt, we believed we had proven that daylight precision bombing was a failed concept. The Americans would have to join the British in night bombing, where accuracy was impossible and damage limited. We had won the theoretical battle. But Galland, brilliant tactician though he was, had made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed the Americans would accept the limitations of existing technology rather than developing new solutions. When reports of a new American fighter with extraordinary range began reaching his desk in December 1943, he dismissed them as wishful thinking. When his own pilots reported single-engine fighters over Hanover in January 1944, he accused them of seeing things that weren't there. It wasn't until February 20th, 1944, the opening day of Big Week, that Galland began to grasp the magnitude of the threat approaching. The Americans launched 1,000 bombers with 835 fighter escorts, including the first large-scale deployment of P-51Bs deep into German territory. For the next 5 days, the Luftwaffe lost 262 fighters. More critically, 100 experienced pilots. 17% of their available veteran fighter force evaporated in less than a week. Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Wutz Galland, Adolf's younger brother commanding 3 JG-26, reported after Big Week ended. The appearance of Mustangs changed everything. Before, we could position ourselves beyond fighter range and attack the bombers methodically. Now, we had to fight our way through escorts just to reach the bombers. Then, fight our way out again. Every mission became a battle for survival, from takeoff to landing. The morning of March 6, 1944, dawned clear and cold across northern Europe. Perfect flying weather stretched from England to Berlin. At RAF Leiston in England, ground crews had worked through the night. They prepared the 357th Fighter Group for the most ambitious mission yet attempted. The first P-51 unit to provide escort all the way to Berlin and back. Colonel Henry Spicer, commanded the 357th Fighter Group. He briefed his pilots at 600 hours in the operations hut. Steam rose from coffee cups in the chilled air. Charts covered every wall. Red lines traced the route deep into Germany. "Gentlemen, today we go to Big B. The entire distance. We'll be over enemy territory for 4 hours. Any man who doesn't think his aircraft is in perfect condition should abort now. There will be no second chances at these distances." No one aborted during the briefing. The pilots filed out to their aircraft with quiet determination. However, Colonel Spicer himself would abort shortly after takeoff with mechanical problems. This left Major Thomas Hayes to assume command of the historic mission. At 0830 hours, 730 heavy bombers began lifting off from bases across East Anglia. The thunder of Wright Cyclone engines shook the English countryside. Behind them, 796 fighters prepared to provide relay escort. P-47s would handle the initial penetration. P-38s would take the middle phase. P-51 Mustangs would fly the deepest penetration and target escort, the most dangerous part of the mission. The 357th Fighter Group launched 48 P-51Bs. Only 33 would successfully reach Berlin after mechanical issues and navigation challenges in heavy cloud cover. But 33 Mustangs over Berlin would be enough to change the course of the air war. In Germany, Reichsluftfahrtführung radar stations began picking up the massive formation as it assembled over the North Sea. Electronic pulses tracked hundreds of aircraft moving east toward the continent. Plotters at Doberitz, the primary fighter control center for Berlin's defense, initially assessed this as another feint. The Americans had approached Berlin before, but always turned away to hit targets in western Germany. Secondary objectives that avoided the heaviest defenses around the capital. Oberst Ludwig Franzisket commanded the 2nd Fighter Division responsible for Berlin's defense. He studied the plotting board with experienced eyes. Hundreds of contacts moving steadily east, but experience suggested they would turn south or north before reaching the capital. He made a fateful decision. Hold the fighters on the ground until the bombers committed to their target. No point wasting precious fuel if this was another deception. German fighters would scramble when the enemy's intentions became clear. At 11:30 hours, the lead bombers crossed into German airspace near Arnhem. The escorting P-47s immediately engaged German fighters rising from bases in Holland and western Germany. Contrails began streaking across the sky as combat was joined. Everything proceeded according to the established pattern. Luftwaffe pilots engaged cautiously. They knew what came next. American escorts would reach their fuel limits and turn back. The bombers would become vulnerable. Patient German fighters could then attack without interference. At 12:55 hours, as the bomber stream approached Brandenburg, Major Hans Kogler led his mixed formation to intercept what they believed would be unescorted bombers. His force consisted of 7 Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighters pressed into day service. 41 single-engine Bf-109s accompanied them. German controllers had tracked the P-47s turning back on schedule. The bombers appeared vulnerable. Time for the kill. Major Thomas Hayes led the 357th Fighter Group's 33 Mustangs that had successfully navigated through difficult weather to reach Berlin. He later described the critical moment in his combat report. "We broke through the cloud layer to see B-24 Liberators below and to our left. Immediately, we spotted approximately 40 enemy aircraft positioning for attack. Me-110s and Me-109s. They hadn't seen us yet. We had altitude advantage and complete surprise." The German formation focused entirely on the bomber stream below. They never saw the Mustangs until it was too late. Hayes rolled into a dive, calling out over the radio. "Greenhouse Squadron, this is Greenhouse Leader. Bandits at 2 o'clock low. Drop tanks and attack." Auxiliary tanks tumbled away from 33 Mustangs. The fighters accelerated toward terminal velocity. Silver shapes diving out of the sun with all the fury of avenging angels. Feldwebel Johann Müller of JG-11 flew one of the escorting Bf-109s. He survived the encounter and later described those terrifying moments. "We were in perfect position, just beginning our attack dive on the bombers when tracer fire flashed past my canopy. I looked up to see single-engine fighters with American markings diving on us from above. It was impossible. We were over Berlin. My first thought was that these must be captured aircraft, some kind of deception. But then I saw the drop tanks falling away. Dozens of them. I knew these were real American fighters with range we hadn't imagined possible. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. German fighters, caught completely by surprise and out of position, scattered in confusion. Some tried to dive away. Others attempted to climb and turn. All found themselves pursued by Mustangs with superior altitude, speed, and position. In 12 minutes of combat, the 357th Fighter Group claimed 20 enemy aircraft destroyed. They didn't lose a single P-51. Hayes himself shot down a Bf-109 at low altitude near Werder, then led other Mustangs in a strafing attack on a German airfield. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. At his estate at Karenhall, 50 miles north of Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring was having lunch in his opulent dining room. Crystal glasses caught afternoon light. Fine wine accompanied the meal. Then the telephone call came through from Generalleutnant Adolf Galland. "American fighters are over Berlin. Single-engine fighters." Göring's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His face flushed with anger. "You're mistaken, Galland. Check your reports again." "Herr Reichsmarschall, I have visual confirmation from multiple sources. P-51 Mustangs are engaging our fighters over Potsdam at this moment." Göring's rage was volcanic. According to his aide, Oberst Bernd von Brauchitsch, who was present, the Reichsmarschall threw his wine glass against the wall. Crystal shattered across marble floors. "This is treason! Sabotage! The pilots are lying to cover their cowardice. I will have every man who makes such claims court-martialed." But even as Göring raged, the evidence was undeniable. From his own estate, he could see contrails over Berlin, hear the distant thunder of aircraft engines at full power. Combat was taking place directly over the German capital. His aide testified after the war that Göring stood at the window for nearly an hour, watching the sky, saying nothing, the reality slowly sinking in. That evening, Göring issued his most infamous order of the air war. Any pilot who claims to have seen American single-engine fighters over Berlin is to be arrested for cowardice and spreading defeatist propaganda. The maximum range of American fighters is the Ruhr. This is a scientific fact. The order created chaos in fighter units already reeling from their losses. Pilots who had just survived combat against P-51s were now threatened with court-martial for reporting what they had seen with their own eyes. Several squadron commanders, including Major Gunther Roll, simply ignored the order. They told their pilots to report twin-engine fighters in their combat reports. Official lies to protect their men from their own leadership. General Major Galland, in a heated conference at the Air Ministry on March 8th, presented Göring with physical evidence. A piece of a P-51's drop tank, clearly stamped, "Made in USA," recovered from a field near Magdeburg. Göring's response entered Luftwaffe legend. I don't care if you bring me a whole Mustang on a silver platter. The Americans cannot escort to Berlin. It's scientifically impossible. It was at this point, according to Galan's memoirs, that he knew Germany had lost the war. Later at Nuremberg, Göring would admit the truth. When I saw American fighters over Berlin, I knew the jig was up. For individual Luftwaffe pilots, the appearance of Mustangs over Berlin represented more than tactical surprise. It was an existential crisis. These were men told repeatedly they were defending an impregnable fortress, that German science and engineering were superior to anything the Allies could produce. Hauptmann Heinz Knocker, commanding 2nd Squadron of Jagdgeschwader 11, wrote in his diary on March 7, 1944, "Yesterday changed everything. We had always known where we were safe, where we could reform, where we could attack without interference. That certainty is gone. If they can reach Berlin, they can reach anywhere. We are no longer hunters, but the hunted, even over our own capital." The psychological impact was amplified by the quality of the opposition. The P-51B wasn't merely present over Berlin. It was dominant in every performance category that mattered. Its Merlin engine gave it a top speed of 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The Bf-109G6 could manage only 386 miles per hour at the same altitude. Its laminar flow wing provided exceptional high-altitude handling characteristics. Its 450 caliber machine guns delivered concentrated firepower in tight patterns. Most crucially, its pilots were fresh, not fatigued from hours of combat at the edge of their fuel reserves. Unteroffizier Werner Preuss of JG 301 survived an encounter with P-51s on March 9th. He described the hopeless nature of the combat. "They came from above and behind, always with altitude advantage. When we turned to engage, they would zoom, climb away. They had the power to go vertical whenever they chose. When we tried to dive away, they followed easily. They fought like they had unlimited fuel, making multiple passes, following us down to low altitude. We were used to American fighters that had to watch their fuel. That would make one pass and continue home. These Mustangs played with us like cats with mice." Johannes Steinhoff commanded JG 77. He would later write about the strategic shift that followed March 6th. "We had to assume every bomber formation had Mustang escort, even if we couldn't see them initially. No more large formation attacks. No more taking time to position ourselves properly. We had to go in immediately with whatever we had, accept higher losses, hope to get through to the bombers before the Mustangs found us." The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin coincided with and accelerated another crisis slowly strangling the Luftwaffe. Fuel shortage was becoming critical across all fronts. Germany had always been dependent on synthetic fuel production. Converting coal to aviation gasoline through the Burgess hydrogenation process required massive industrial plants. Plants that were now vulnerable to precision bombing. Before March 1944, these synthetic fuel plants had been largely immune from attack. They were too far from England for accurate bombing with fighter escort. The mathematics were brutally simple. Without escort, bombers couldn't survive over the target long enough for precision bombing. Without precision, the massive concrete structures of hydrogenation plants were unlikely to suffer serious damage. The Mustang changed this equation overnight. On May 12, 1944, the 8th Air Force launched its first major attack against the synthetic fuel plant at Leuna, 100 miles southwest of Berlin. 800 bombers escorted by 735 fighters, including 298 P-51s, delivered 1,718 tons of bombs with unprecedented accuracy. Production at Leuna dropped 90% overnight. Months of accumulated fuel reserves vanished in a single raid. By June 1944, German aviation fuel production had fallen from 175,000 tons per month to 35,000 tons. By September, it was down to 7,000 tons. Barely enough to fuel 500 sorties per day across all fronts. Training flights were cancelled entirely. New pilots arrived at operational units with as little as 50 hours total flight time. This compared to the 250 hours that had been standard in 1942. A veteran pilot who had transferred from the Eastern Front to Reich Defense described the deteriorating situation. By summer 1944, we were limited to one training flight per week, then one per month, then none at all. New pilots arrived at our units having never fired their guns in flight, never practiced formation flying, never engaged in mock combat. They were lambs to the slaughter. The shortage wasn't just fuel. It was experience, confidence, everything that makes a fighter pilot effective. The true measure of the Mustang's impact became clear on June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history, required absolute air superiority over the beaches. The Allies flew 14,674 sorties on D-Day. The Luftwaffe managed 319, losing 35 aircraft in the process. Over the actual invasion beaches, only 2 German fighters appeared throughout the entire day. Oberst Josef Pips Priller commanded JG-26. He led the only Luftwaffe attack on the invasion beaches. His wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wodarczyk, accompanied him on a single strafing run at Sword Beach before being chased away by Spitfires. In his post-war memoir, Priller wrote with bitter irony, "2 planes. That's all we could manage against the greatest invasion in history. Not because we lacked courage, but because we lacked fuel. We lacked aircraft. Above all, we lacked air superiority. The Mustangs had taken that from us months before. Not over Normandy, but over Berlin." Major Werner Schroer had commanded the 3 JG-54. He claimed a P-51 on May 24, 1944. Later he reflected on the strategic situation with the clear vision of hindsight. After the Mustangs appeared over Berlin, we never regained the initiative. We were always reacting, always defending, always outnumbered. The Americans could strike anywhere at any time with fighter escort. We could barely defend our own airfields. The war in the air was lost the moment they could reach Berlin. In desperation, the Luftwaffe developed increasingly suicidal tactics. The Sturmgruppe, or assault group concept, epitomized this desperation. Focke-Wulf 190As were modified with additional armor plating. 30mm cannons replaced machine guns. Reinforced windscreens were fitted to deflect debris. These flying tanks would bore straight through fighter screens to attack bombers at point-blank range, accepting catastrophic losses to achieve results. Major Walter Dahl had taken command of JG-300 on June 27, 1944. He became the most famous proponent of these desperate tactics. On July 7, 1944, Dahl led Fortsturm JG-3 with support from 2 Gruppen of Bf-109s from JG-300 in a massive assault against B-24 Liberators near Leipzig. The heavily armored FW-190s managed to destroy an entire squadron. 12 B-24s from the 482nd Bomb Group fell in less than a minute, but the cost was equally devastating. Half the German fighters were shot down by escorting Mustangs. The price paid was devastating beyond imagination. Stormgrouper fighters that launched into combat saw 9 aircraft torn from the sky by enemy fire. 3 more crashed violently upon attempted landing. The escorting Bf-109s suffered even more catastrophic losses when they encountered the deadly Mustang escorts overhead. Combat methods that showed brief promise during July operations became increasingly deadly suicide missions. American fighter strength multiplied with each passing week. The odds shifted dramatically against German pilots. Oberfeldwebel Conrad Bauer managed to survive several Stormgrouper missions when most did not. His stark assessment revealed the brutal truth. Flying those missions meant climbing into coffins with wings. Heavy armor plates designed for pilot protection transformed the aircraft into lumbering death traps. Speed dropped to dangerous levels. Mustangs could circle around them like sharks around wounded prey. Multiple firing passes became routine for American pilots. Each attack run delivered devastating results. Orders demanded ramming attacks when guns failed, but reaching the bombers proved impossible. Fighter screens blocked every approach. Russian roulette seemed safer. Every chamber contained a live round. Revolutionary technology offered Germany's final desperate hope. The Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalbe earned its nickname Swallow for good reason. This represented the world's first operational jet fighter to see combat. Maximum speed reached 540 mph in level flight. This exceeded the P-51D Mustang by 100 mph. Experienced pilots could have revolutionized aerial combat overnight. The Me 262 arrived after critical opportunities had passed. Numbers remained painfully inadequate for decisive impact. Hitler's stubborn insistence created catastrophic delays. The aircraft had to serve as a blitz bomber first. Fighter interceptor roles took second priority. Precious months vanished while the war situation deteriorated. Late 1944 brought significant numbers available for fighter operations finally. The Luftwaffe lacked fuel for proper pilot training by then. Safe airfields for jet operations had disappeared under constant attack. Adolf Gehland faced dismissal as General de Jagdflieger earlier. His criticism of Hitler's policies had sealed his fate. February 1945 brought new opportunity with JV-44 Command. This elite jet unit gathered Germany's finest surviving pilots. The world's most advanced fighter technology filled their hangars. Overwhelming numerical superiority still crushed German efforts completely. Gehland himself witnessed the crushing futility firsthand. Takeoff meant engaging one or two enemy aircraft successfully. Landing revealed mass tanks attacking the home airfield. Ground attacks became the primary threat to survival. Hunters pursued German jets relentlessly across the countryside. Me-262s faced extreme vulnerability during takeoff sequences. Landing approaches offered easy targets for prowling fighters. Every minute spent airborne meant enemy mass tanks overhead for hours. Advanced technology without adequate numbers proved useless. Fuel shortages crippled operations completely. Infrastructure collapse accelerated rapidly. Autumn 1944 witnessed what historians later termed the death of expertise. Veteran pilots with dozens of victories died faster than replacements arrived. Some aces had scored hundreds of aerial victories over their careers. Mass tank appearances deep inside Germany eliminated safe training areas. No quiet sectors remained for novice pilots to gain experience. Training statistics revealed the grim progression toward disaster. New Luftwaffe pilots received 250 hours of flight training in 1940. Combat readiness meant thorough preparation back then. The year 1944 saw this reduced to merely 80 hours. Early 1945 brought even more desperate measures. Some pilots entered combat with only 20 hours in aircraft type. American pilots arriving in England brought vastly superior preparation. Flight time averaged 400 to 500 hours total. This included 100 hours in specific aircraft type. Extensive gunnery training prepared them for combat reality. The disparity became insurmountable as war progressed. Johannes Steinhoff survived terrible burns from Me-262 crash. His aircraft exploded during takeoff attempts in April 1945. Later reflection revealed the horror of German pilot situation. Children were being sent to certain death. Boys could barely maintain formation flying. They faced Mustang pilots with hundreds of combat hours. Combat had transformed into systematic murder. Looking at replacement pilots' faces became unbearable. Most would die within their first week of operations. The mathematics of survival had become impossible. January 1945, statistics confirmed these devastating assessments. New Luftwaffe fighter pilots averaged 7 missions before death. Complete certainty replaced hope for survival. One combat unit experienced 100% personnel turnover within 30 days. Elite units crumbled under relentless pressure. JG 301 had once represented German fighter excellence. The first 3 months of 1945 consumed 82 pilots. Victory claims totaled only 41 enemy aircraft destroyed. The kill ratio had reversed completely against German forces. Lieutenant Gunther Hasser survived the entire war. His final tally showed 3 aerial victories. The newly qualified pilot's perspective revealed training reality. His first mission was labeled a training flight. A simple patrol over Brunswick with experienced pilots provided the plan. Mustangs bounced the formation before proper assembly. The flight leader died in the first firing pass. Gunther never saw the Mustang that targeted him. Tracer rounds streaked past his canopy glass. Diving to tree level offered the only escape route. Flying home alone completed his combat training. American bombing campaigns relentlessly destroyed German aircraft production. The Mustang's exceptional range meant no factory remained safe. Great production centers faced repeated devastating attacks. Regensburg, Augsburg, Vienna, Neustadt, and Leipzig burned regularly. Bombing accuracy had improved dramatically over earlier efforts. Albert Speer served as Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production. His post-war testimony revealed the impossible situation. Mustang escorts allowed Americans to maintain continuous industrial pressure. Factory repairs would be completed quickly. Production would resume within days. Fresh bombing attacks would destroy everything again within hours. Production dispersal to caves and forests became necessary. Hidden facilities increased costs dramatically. Manufacturing efficiency dropped by 75% immediately. More fighters rolled off production lines in 1944 than 1943. Production speed could not match mounting losses. Fuel shortages grounded completed aircraft. Qualified pilots no longer existed to fly them. Statistical evidence supported Speer's grim assessment completely. German fighter production peaked at 3,013 aircraft in September 1944. That same month brought 3,217 aircraft losses. The Luftwaffe literally lost fighters faster than production. The world's most efficient industrial economy could not keep pace. Dispersed facilities produced aircraft of declining quality. Hastily assembled fighters suffered numerous mechanical failures. Engine problems plagued new aircraft consistently. Structural weaknesses appeared regularly. System malfunctions became routine occurrences. Engineer Kurt Tank had designed the famous FW-190 fighter. His December 1944 visit to frontline units brought shocking discoveries. Critical defects marked newly delivered aircraft. Engines rated for 100 hours failed after 10. Control surfaces jammed during flight operations. Guns arrived with misaligned sighting systems. World-class fighter production had degraded to flying death traps. Exhausted workers could not maintain quality standards. Substandard materials compromised structural integrity. Testing procedures had been eliminated entirely. German industry was sabotaging itself through desperation. Operation Bodenplatte launched on January 1, 1945. This massive surprise attack targeted Allied airfields. Belgium and Netherlands bases faced coordinated assault. 900 fighters represented virtually the entire remaining Western Front strength. Dawn takeoffs began the desperate gamble. Many pilots flew their first combat mission that morning. Formation flying experience was limited to 4 aircraft groups. Mission secrecy prevented coordination with German flak units. Devastating friendly fire incidents resulted immediately. Complete tactical surprise was achieved despite coordination problems. 305 Allied aircraft burned on the ground. Another 190 suffered significant damage from the attacks. The cost proved absolutely catastrophic for German forces. 271 Luftwaffe aircraft were lost completely. More critically, 213 irreplaceable pilots died or were captured. 3 Geschwader Commodore fell in single day. 6 Gruppenkommandure were killed or captured. 14 Staffelkapitaner disappeared from the roster. The leadership structure collapsed entirely in one operation. Oberst Johann Kogler survived the mission through pure luck. His assessment called it the Luftwaffe's final death ride. Aircraft destroyed could be replaced within 1 week. Lost pilots could never be replaced by anyone. Worse still, the last fuel reserves burned completely. Bodenplatte left German forces spent entirely. Contesting the skies became impossible after that morning. American response arrived within 48 hours of the attack. Mustang sweeps methodically hunted weakened German fighter units. Airfields faced repeated strafing attacks throughout the day. Aircraft caught on the ground burned helplessly. The week following Bodenplatte brought 400 additional aircraft losses. Most burned on airfields during ground attacks. Luftwaffe resistance collapsed completely across all fronts. Major John Meyer flew with the 352nd Fighter Group. His 24 aerial victories provided extensive combat experience. The post-Bodenplatte period seemed almost tragic to witness. German airfields packed with grounded aircraft became easy targets. Fuel shortages prevented defensive operations entirely. Strafing runs met no opposition whatsoever. Aircraft burned helplessly while German personnel watched. Combat had transformed into systematic execution. Fairness had no place in warfare anymore. 1945 witnessed the Luftwaffe's complete dissolution as effective force. Individual pilots still flew occasional sorties when possible. Coordinated operations had become completely impossible. Mustang appearances over German airfields meant certain destruction. Aircraft could not be concentrated safely anywhere. Pilots began refusing flight orders regularly. This was not cowardice, but logical recognition. Taking off guaranteed certain death with no strategic purpose. The war's outcome could not be affected anymore. Refusing missions represented rational survival instinct. Psychological toll devastated remaining German personnel completely. Prince Knocker had written enthusiastically about Reich defense earlier. His final published diary entry revealed complete despair. Countless friends from the unit had died already. Boys he had trained personally were all dead. Boys he had flown beside were all dead. Boys he had loved like brothers were all dead. The purpose had vanished entirely from their sacrifice. Reaching the bombers had become impossible. Mustangs appeared everywhere across German skies. American fighters owned the airspace completely. Fighter pilot status no longer existed for Germans. They had become targets awaiting execution. Captured Luftwaffe records revealed the statistical progression toward annihilation. January 1944 showed 2,395 fighter pilots available for operations. June 1944 brought the D-Day period with 1,523 available. January 1945 counted 742 fighter pilots still operational. April 1945 estimated approximately 200 pilots still flying. Operational pilots from January 1, 1944 showed devastating attrition rates. Fewer than 5% survived the war without serious injury. Mustangs appearing over Berlin had triggered complete annihilation. An entire generation of German aviators was consumed systematically. Post-war testimony from surviving Luftwaffe pilots provided remarkable candor. Allied intelligence officers collected detailed statements. Later, historians gathered additional interviews over decades. These accounts revealed the psychological collapse of once dominant forces. Adolf Gehland maintained respect despite wartime dismissal. His conflicts with Nazi leadership had cost him position. The 1954 interview provided definitive assessment of Mustang impact. The P-51 Mustang represented the decisive weapon over Germany. No single category made it the absolute best fighter. The Spitfire turned more tightly in dogfights. The FW-190 rolled faster in combat maneuvers. The Me-262 flew faster than anything else. But the Mustang excelled at everything adequately. More importantly, it could fly anywhere over Europe. Its appearance over Berlin signaled certain defeat. The chess analogy fit perfectly. American opponents suddenly possessed queens moving anywhere on the board. German pieces could not compete with such mobility. Johannes Steinhoff survived his April 1945 Me-262 crash. Terrible burns marked his face permanently. Post-war service included German Air Force Chief of Staff. NATO Military Committee Chairman represented his final position. His assessment proved equally devastating for German hopes. The Mustang accomplished more than Luftwaffe defeat. It destroyed the entire concept of German air superiority. German defensive strategy assumed single-engine fighters could not reach Germany. This fundamental assumption proved completely false. Strategic catastrophe followed immediately. Recovery became impossible under the circumstances. Heinz Knock had chronicled the entire progression in his diary. Confidence had transformed into complete collapse over months. The 1975 reunion brought former adversaries together peacefully. Colonel Clarence Bad Anderson had flown Mustangs with distinction. The 3-5-7 fighter group provided his combat assignment. Triple Ace status reflected his aerial combat success. Nook's conversation with Anderson revealed German psychological trauma. Seeing Mustangs over Berlin that first time felt like discovering endless ocean. German propaganda had claimed victory was certain. America seemed too distant to threaten the homeland. Suddenly, American fighters appeared over the capital. Fuel remained for extended combat operations. Something fundamental broke inside German consciousness. Faith in victory disappeared completely. Trust in leadership evaporated entirely. Everything they had been told proved false. Erich Hartmann achieved 352 aerial victories during the war. This represented the highest-scoring ace of any nation. Survival required specific anti-Mustang tactics development. Attacks only occurred when holding every advantage. Immediate disengagement followed Mustang appearances anywhere. Post-war interviews acknowledged the reality of Mustang combat. Fighting them was not combat as Germans understood. It became pure survival against overwhelming odds. Mustangs held every advantage imaginable. Numbers, altitude, fuel, and pilot quality all favored Americans. German pilots could only hope to survive encounters. Perhaps surprising a straggler offered the only victory opportunity. Statistical analysis revealed the P-51 Mustang's devastating impact completely. Numerical data demonstrated American success and German defeat clearly. Aircraft destroyed showed Mustang dominance throughout Europe. Aerial victories totaled 4,150 confirmed kills in European theater. Ground destruction added 4,131 enemy aircraft eliminated. This represented 48.9% of all USAF fighter claims. Combat loss rates showed dramatic disparity between forces. P-51 losses averaged 1.2% per sortie flown. Luftwaffe fighter loss rates reached 18% per sortie by 1945. Overall kill ratios favored P-51s by 3.6 to 1. Bomber protection statistics revealed transformation in strategic bombing. Pre-Mustang bomber loss rates averaged 9.1% per mission. Post-Mustang rates dropped to 2.5% per mission. Bomber crew casualties decreased by 68% overall. Strategic bombing became sustainable for American forces. Range revolution transformed aerial warfare completely. P-47 Thunderbolt combat radius reached 375 miles maximum. P-38 Lightning extended this to 450 miles. P-51 B/C Mustang achieved 650 miles with drop tanks. P-51 D Mustang reached 750 miles with external fuel. 100% of German territory fell within P-51 range. Production supremacy demonstrated American industrial capacity. Total P-51 production reached 15,686 aircraft completed. Peak production rates achieved 320 aircraft per month. Cost per aircraft averaged $51,000 in contemporary dollars. This translated to $19.45 in today's purchasing power. German fighter production totaled 25,860 aircraft in 1944. Operational fighters never exceeded 1,500 at any time. American production dwarfed German capacity completely. Pilot attrition rates revealed training disparities between nations. American pilots arriving in Europe averaged 400 hours flight time. German pilots entering combat averaged only 80 hours. Luftwaffe pilot survival rates fell below 15% by war's end. American fighter pilot tour completion rates reached 65%. Mustangs appearing over Berlin represented more than tactical victory. Strategic revolution in air warfare had occurred. One nation could project decisive air power over another major power completely. The implications extended far beyond World War II conclusion. General Carl Spaatz commanded United States Strategic Air Forces. His after-action report emphasized the transformation achieved. P-51 Mustangs provided air supremacy over Europe completely. This exceeded air superiority, which implied continuing contest. Air supremacy meant total domination of airspace. Spring 1944 enabled strikes against any target anytime. Acceptable loss rates made all missions feasible. Military advantage combined with psychological weapon effects. German morale collapsed when omnipresent American presence became obvious. Cascade strategic effects multiplied Mustang impact throughout Germany. Industrial paralysis resulted from factory vulnerability. No German production facility remained safe from attack. Dispersed manufacturing became necessary for survival. Inefficient hidden facilities replaced concentrated production. Transportation networks faced constant severing attacks. The German economy already strained toward complete collapse. Every sector felt the mounting pressure simultaneously. Fuel crisis acceleration created death spiral effects. Synthetic fuel plants previously unreachable faced methodical destruction. Less fuel meant reduced pilot training opportunities. Higher combat losses resulted from inadequate preparation. Even less fuel could be allocated to training programs. Tactical air supremacy enabled ground force operations. The Luftwaffe's removal from skies meant Allied forces operated freely. Normandy breakout became possible through air superiority. The race across France proceeded without air opposition. Rhine crossing faced no aerial interference. German ground forces could move only during nighttime hours. Daytime movement meant certain destruction from prowling fighters. Combat effectiveness dropped dramatically under these constraints. Psychological collapse shattered German civilian morale completely. American fighters circling over the Reich's capital destroyed invincibility myths. Civilians had been told America was weak. Distance was supposed to provide protection from American forces. Silver Mustangs overhead proved every claim false. Germany had begun the war with significant technological advantages. The Bf 109 was arguably 1939's finest fighter aircraft. German pilot training exceeded all international standards. Combat experience from Spanish Civil War provided additional advantages. Revolutionary tactics included finger four formations. Energy fighting techniques were completely innovative. The Mustang represented something fundamentally different from German approaches. British innovation provided the Merlin engine foundation. American mass production applied automobile industry techniques. North American aviation assembled these elements successfully. Continuous improvement based on combat experience drove refinements. Single genius designers did not create the Mustang. Collaborative refinement produced the final result. The P-51D began arriving in May 1944. Combat experience drove numerous improvements incorporated. Bubble canopy provided 360-degree visibility for pilots. 650 caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower. Improved ammunition feed systems prevented jams. K-14 computing gun sight enhanced accuracy. Strengthened wings carried additional ordnance loads. Improved radio equipment enhanced coordination. Packard 51650-7 engine produced 1590 horsepower. Each improvement addressed specific combat needs. Pilot feedback drove rapid design evolution. Better combat performance resulted from continuous refinement. This feedback loop operated smoothly throughout development. German systems with chaotic leadership could not match this. Disrupted production prevented similar improvements. Dr. Kurt Tank had designed the exceptional FW-190. His post-war admission revealed German limitations. Equal or superior aircraft could be designed. The TA-152H surpassed Mustangs in many categories. Quantity production remained impossible under wartime conditions. Consistent fuel supplies could not be maintained. Effective pilot training had become impossible. Americans had not just built superior fighters. They had built superior systems for everything. Design, production, and employment all excelled. German responses to Mustang threats revealed Nazi system flaws. Reality denial replaced acknowledgement of threats. Adaptation never occurred at leadership levels. Bomber production took priority over fighters. Hitler's demands overruled military necessity. Experienced pilots flew until death rather than teaching. Strategic miscalculation was never admitted publicly. Pilots reporting truth faced court-martial proceedings. Germany's celebrated aces faced systematic elimination. These men had scored dozens of victories. Many had hundreds of aerial kills. They symbolized German martial prowess. The Mustang era saw their destruction one by one. Major Klaus Mittusch had scored 72 victories. P-51s killed him on September 17, 1944. He had survived 452 combat missions successfully. Mustangs bounced him while forming for attack. Experience could not overcome numerical superiority. Oberst Walter Osa achieved 123 victories total. P-38s shot him down on May 11, 1944. Even older American fighters had become lethal. German pilot quality decline made all encounters dangerous. Major Hans Philipp scored 206 victories before death. P-47s shot him down on October 8, 1943. This preceded massive Mustang deployments. His death foreshadowed what was coming. The casualty list continued relentlessly. Germany's finest pilots were eliminated systematically. 107 German pilots had achieved 100 or more victories. By war's end, 95 were dead, wounded, or captured. The Mustang had not just defeated the Luftwaffe, it had annihilated the institution's memory completely. 1945 began with Luftwaffe existing more on paper than reality. Aircraft hid in forests throughout Germany. Camouflaged positions resembled fake farmland. Highway strips provided dispersed operations. Pilots lived like hunted animals constantly. Movement was necessary to avoid omnipresent Mustangs. Oberst Gordon Golob commanded remaining senior forces. His orders revealed complete desperation. Aircraft takeoffs only occurred when bombers appeared directly overhead. Maximum sortie duration was limited to 15 minutes. Any pilot airborne longer than 20 minutes was presumed defected. Mustang fear had become completely pervasive. Many pilots aborted missions upon first escort reports. Courts-martial for cowardice became common practice. Executing experienced pilots with so few remaining proved counterproductive. Morale collapsed entirely when successful missions achieved nothing. Bombers kept coming despite German efforts. Mustang escorts continued providing protection. Germany kept dying regardless of pilot sacrifice. Lieutenant Heinrich Bartels had achieved 99 victories. He was shot down and killed December 23, 1944. One victory short of becoming century ace. His wingman reported 6 Mustangs attacking. They came from above and behind positions. Heinrich never had a chance to respond. They followed him down while firing continuously. Even after his aircraft was burning, shooting continued. They wanted to ensure complete destruction. This ruthlessness represented something new in aerial warfare. Earlier periods had maintained degrees of chivalry. Pilots bailing out were generally not attacked. Damaged aircraft withdrawing were sometimes allowed escape. By 1945, American pilots had seen too many friends die. War's end was clearly approaching. Ensuring Luftwaffe could never recover became priority. Every German pilot killed was one less for jets. Advanced fighters Germany was still developing needed pilots. American Mustang pilots provided remarkably consistent assessments. The campaign's progression was clearly visible. Colonel John C. Meyer scored 24 aerial victories. His analysis divided the war into distinct phases. March to June 1944 brought combat against Germany's first team. These pilots were experienced, aggressive, and skilled. June to December faced their second line. Still dangerous, but less coordinated than earlier. 1945 meant shooting down students. Kids could barely fly formation. Fighting them was necessary, but tragic. Lieutenant Colonel John B. England commanded the 362nd Fighter Squadron. His observation emphasized psychological factors. The Mustang provided more than extended range. It delivered psychological dominance over German pilots. German pilots knew Mustang encounters meant probable death. Tactical changes revealed this psychological impact. Early war brought aggressive attacks despite being outnumbered. Late 1944 brought immediate withdrawal upon Mustang sighting. 1945 meant many would not take off. Mustang reports in area prevented missions entirely. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager later broke the sound barrier. His 11.5 Mustang victories provided extensive experience. His assessment was characteristically direct and honest. The P-51 was an honest airplane. It communicated intentions clearly to pilots. No vices existed if treated properly. Against German fighters in 1944 and 1945, it was like having rifles versus muskets. Americans held every advantage possible. Speed, range, altitude, and numbers all favored Mustangs. Fair fights were not the objective. War was not supposed to be fair. Bomber crews provided the most telling testimony. Their lives depended entirely on fighter escort effectiveness. Technical Sergeant William McManus gunned B-17s with the 100th Bomb Group. His recollection revealed escort impact. Before Mustangs, every mission felt like suicide. Watching escort turn back meant wolves were coming. German fighters would attack mercilessly. After March 1944, seeing Mustangs all the way to target felt like guardian angels. Loss rates transformed from probably dying to probably surviving. P-51 success represented more than design triumph. Production achievements seemed impossible by German standards. North American aviation plants operated in Englewood, California, and Dallas, Texas. Peak 1944 production completed one Mustang every 63 minutes. Assembly line adaptation from automobile manufacturing broke construction into specialized stations. Workers became experts at single specific tasks, speeds and precision impossible with traditional aircraft manufacturing were achieved regularly. Paul Peters supervised production at Englewood facility. His description revealed the system's effectiveness. Housewives installed control cables with precision. Teenagers riveted wing panels expertly. Men too old for military draft-assembled engines. Traditional aircraft manufacturing assumptions were completely overturned. Not one person among them had ever constructed an aircraft before the conflict began. Yet the production system worked so brilliantly that perfect components rolled off the line within weeks. Every station had inspectors watching. Quality controllers stood ready. When problems appeared, everything stopped. Nothing moved until fixes were complete. The difference between American and German manufacturing was shocking. Allied bombers forced German production underground. Workers assembled aircraft in mountain caves. Factories moved into abandoned mines. Forest clearings became temporary assembly points. Components traveled hundreds of miles between facilities. Consistent quality became impossible under these conditions. Many workers were prisoners forced into labor. These people had every reason to damage what they built. Sabotage was their only weapon. Oberst Dietrich Rubach commanded fighter squadrons throughout the war years. His observations painted a grim picture. Perfect-looking aircraft arrived at our bases regularly. Inside, they were death traps waiting to kill German pilots. Control cables were deliberately installed backwards. Fuel systems leaked from day one. Machine guns jammed after firing single rounds. American factories were producing superior aircraft in massive quantities. Their workers wanted victory for their side. Our factories struggled to build inferior machines in tiny numbers. Our forced laborers wanted us to lose the war. Every rivet they placed was an act of resistance. The success of those Mustangs appearing over Berlin created ripples across every theater of war. Air power could now be projected anywhere on the globe. Distance no longer protected anyone from American reach. This reality was not lost on Japan. Japanese military leaders watched their defensive barriers crumble. American long-range escorts enabled bombing raids against the home islands. The protective ring they had built across the Pacific was collapsing. Stalin observed these developments with keen interest. Soviet pilots flew Lend-Lease Mustangs and reported back to Moscow. These aircraft impressed them with their incredible range capabilities. Their reliability was unlike anything Soviet factories produced. The VVS began developing long-range escort fighters immediately. Future conflicts would demand power projection across vast continental distances. The Soviet Air Force received exactly 10 Mustangs for extensive testing programs. They never used these aircraft in actual combat operations, but the lessons learned influenced Soviet aviation for decades. The Mustang's service record extended far beyond World War II's conclusion. Korean War F-51s provided close air support to ground forces. The designation had changed in 1948 from P-51 to F-51. Israeli pilots flew Mustangs during the 1956 Suez Crisis operations. Various air forces around the world continued flying these aircraft into the 1980s. The Dominican Air Force finally retired their last F-51D in 1984. 40 years had passed since those first flights over Berlin appeared. But the aircraft's greatest contribution was changing military doctrine forever. Air superiority no longer meant controlling battlefield airspace alone. It meant dominating the skies over entire nations. Modern air forces build every strategy around this fundamental principle. The lesson was first demonstrated when American fighters circled Berlin on March 6, 1944. Statistics and strategic analyses only tell part of the story. Behind every number were human beings facing extraordinary circumstances. Young men in their early 20s found themselves making history. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin meant different things to different people watching from below. American pilots felt vindication flooding through their veins. Lieutenant Robert Johnson flew with the 56th Fighter Group that day. His letter home captured the emotion perfectly. We flew directly over Hitler's personal capital today. Just think about what that means. We took off from English airfields this morning. We flew across the entire width of Germany. We circled Berlin like we owned every inch of it. Because we absolutely did own it. Then we flew home safely for dinner. 2 years ago, Nazi bombers were dropping death on London. Today, we control the sky over their capital city. Words cannot describe this feeling properly. Pride fills every part of me. Power flows through my hands on the controls. Absolute certainty that we will win this war fills my mind. German pilots experienced the opposite emotion completely. Despair settled into their hearts like lead weights. Feldwebel Rudy Miller served with JG 302 during those dark days. His letter to his wife revealed the psychological impact. I witnessed them with my own eyes today. American single-engine fighters circling over Berlin. This should be impossible, according to every calculation we made. Yet I watched them fly lazy circles above our capital. If they can reach Berlin, they can reach everywhere in Germany. No safe places remain anywhere in our country. How do I write these words to you? How do I explain that I probably will not survive much longer? How can I make you understand that everything we believed was completely wrong? German civilians experienced the shattering of their final illusions. Berlinerin Ursula von Kardorf recorded her thoughts in her personal diary that evening. The propaganda told us Americans were weak and soft. Their Jewish-controlled society could never match German military strength. Today I stood on my balcony watching American fighters circle overhead freely. Our vaunted Luftwaffe was nowhere to be seen in the sky. Every single thing they told us was lies built upon lies. If they lied about American weakness, what else was fabricated? What other truths have been hidden from us? Allied bomber crews felt salvation washing over them in waves. Staff Sergeant James McMahon operated the ball turret on the B-17 Lucky Lady. His recollection decades later still carried the emotion. Those beautiful Mustangs formed up alongside us as we approached Berlin. I am not ashamed to admit I cried tears of relief. For the first time since I began flying bombing missions, I believed I might actually live through this war. Those little friends with their incredible range saved thousands of bomber crew lives. The war's end revealed the full scope of what the Mustang had accomplished. The Luftwaffe had entered the conflict as arguably the world's most powerful air force. By 1945, it had ceased to exist as an effective fighting organization. The numbers tell a story of complete annihilation. Total Luftwaffe aircraft losses during 1944 and 1945 reached approximately 45,000 machines. Luftwaffe pilot deaths in those same years approached 15,000 men. Less than 5% of pilots who were operational in January 1944 survived the war uninjured. 61 German cities suffered over 50% destruction from bombing raids. German civilian casualties from aerial bombardment ranged between 350,000 and 500,000 deaths. German industrial production loss to bombing campaigns reached 35 to 40% of total capacity. These statistics represent more than military defeat. They show the complete collapse of German society under sustained aerial attack. The Mustang had enabled a bombing campaign that brought war to every German city. Every factory became a target. Every airfield faced destruction. Every rail junction was vulnerable. No rear areas remained safe from attack. No haven existed beyond American reach. No respite was possible from the constant bombardment. Hermann Göring faced questioning at the Nuremberg trials after Germany's surrender. When asked when he knew Germany had lost the war, his answer became legendary. "The moment I saw American fighters flying over Berlin, the game was finished. Everything that happened after that day was merely delay. Just more young men dying for no purpose whatsoever." It was a remarkably honest admission from a man famous for lies and delusions. Even Göring could not deny what those Mustangs represented. American industrial might married to British innovation, power projected across impossible distances with ruthless efficiency. Results achieved with methodical precision that German planners could not match. The P-51's journey from concept to Berlin escort represents one of history's most successful aircraft development programs. The NA-73X prototype first flew on October 26, 1940. Just 102 days had passed since North American aviation received the British Purchasing Commission's initial request. By March 1944, less than 4 years later, these aircraft were escorting bombers to Berlin. This development speed was matched by continuous improvement based on combat experience. Each version incorporated lessons learned from actual fighting. The P-51A used an Allison engine with limited high-altitude performance capabilities. The P-51B and C models featured Packard Merlin V1650-3 engines that transformed performance above 20,000 feet completely. The P-51D added a bubble canopy, 6 machine guns, and improved systems with the V1650-7 engine. The P-51H featured lightweight structure and peak performance, but never saw European combat. This feedback loop of combat experience driving rapid design improvements was something the German system could not replicate. Chaotic Nazi leadership and disrupted production prevented systematic refinement. While German engineers produced technically excellent designs like the TA-152H and ME-262, they could not refine them through combat experience or produce them in meaningful numbers. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin validated the entire American strategic bombing concept completely. Pre-war theorists like Billy Mitchell and Giulio Douhet had argued that bombing alone could win wars. They believed destroying enemy industry and civilian morale would force surrender. Until long-range escort became available, this remained untested theory. The Mustang made precision daylight bombing campaigns possible for the first time. British forces continued area bombing during nighttime hours with limited accuracy. Americans could now place bombs precisely on specific industrial facilities. Ball-bearing factories became priority targets. Synthetic fuel plants faced systematic destruction. Aircraft assembly buildings were methodically eliminated. The accuracy difference between night and day bombing was dramatic and decisive. British nighttime bombing achieved an average circular error of 3 miles from target. American daylight bombing with fighter escort achieved accuracy within 1,000 feet, consistently. General Curtis LeMay later commanded Strategic Air Command during the Cold War. His assessment was characteristically blunt and direct. The P-51 made strategic bombing work as intended. Without long-range escort, we faced two unacceptable choices. Either accept unsustainable bomber losses or switch to ineffective night bombing campaigns. With Mustang escort, we could methodically destroy specific target sets with precision. We did not simply bomb Germany randomly. We performed industrial surgery with surgical precision. We removed their ability to manufacture weapons of war systematically. The results validated our entire strategic approach completely. German ball-bearing production fell by 70% under sustained attack. Aviation fuel production dropped by 95% when refineries were destroyed. Synthetic rubber production decreased by 85% after factory elimination. Railroad traffic was reduced by 75% through systematic targeting. Canal traffic in Western Germany was eliminated entirely through concentrated bombing. This precise application of overwhelming force, made possible by Mustang escort, shortened the war significantly. Every factory destroyed meant fewer weapons for German forces. Every rail line cut reduced supply deliveries to front-line units. Every fuel depot burned grounded more Luftwaffe aircraft permanently. The image of Mustangs flying over Berlin became one of World War II's most iconic visual representations. It ranks alongside the flag raising on Iwo Jima, or Soviet soldiers at the Reichstag. It represented American power projection capabilities and technological superiority. Most importantly, it symbolized the certainty of eventual Allied victory. For Americans, the Mustang embodied their nation's industrial and technological prowess perfectly. It appeared in war bond posters encouraging home front investment. Hollywood films featured the aircraft in heroic roles. Post-war celebrations prominently displayed Mustangs in victory parades. The fact that this aircraft was designed and built in record time by a company with no previous fighter experience embodied the American can-do spirit. North American aviation had built trainers and bombers, but never single-seat fighters before the P-51 project began. For Germans, the Mustang represented humiliation and devastating defeat on a national scale. Post-war German literature frequently features American fighters over German cities as symbols of Nazi regime failure. The trauma of being unable to defend homeland airspace left lasting psychological damage on surviving Luftwaffe veterans. Hans Koglers survived the war and reflected on these experiences in 1953. His words captured the shame felt by many German pilots. For any fighter pilot, the ultimate sacred duty is protecting your homeland's skies from enemy intrusion. We failed completely in this fundamental responsibility. Those Mustangs circling over Berlin were visible proof of our failure. Every German citizen who looked up could see our defeat written across the sky. That shame becomes part of your soul. It never fully disappears, no matter how many years pass. Military academies around the world continue studying the Mustang's impact on the European air war. It serves as a perfect case study in how technology can create strategic revolution overnight. The lessons learned remain timeless and applicable to modern conflicts. Range equals strategic options in any military campaign. The ability to project power across vast distances provides commanders with tactical flexibility. The Mustang gave Allied leaders options that German commanders could never counter effectively. Integration beats isolation in complex military operations. The Mustang succeeded not as an individual weapon system, but as part of an integrated approach. Bombers, fighters, intelligence services, logistics networks, and training programs worked together seamlessly. Germans had excellent individual components, but could not integrate them effectively under wartime pressure. Production volume wins wars more often than technical perfection. Building vast numbers of good aircraft defeats small numbers of excellent aircraft. The Mustang was an excellent design, but more importantly, thousands rolled off American production lines continuously. Pilot quality matters more than raw numbers alone. Technology without properly trained operators becomes useless metal. American pilot training programs emphasized actual flight hours and realistic combat simulation. This produced pilots who could exploit the Mustang's capabilities to their fullest extent. Adaptation ensures survival in rapidly changing combat environments. Americans continuously improved tactics, technology, and training based on actual combat experience. Germans remained hidebound by rigid doctrine and political interference that prevented rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Modern air forces apply these fundamental lessons in their daily operations. The emphasis on long-range strike capabilities stems directly from Mustang lessons. Integrated air defense systems reflect the importance of coordination learned in World War II. Pilot training programs and industrial base preservation policies all trace back to lessons learned when Mustangs first appeared over Berlin. The appearance of P-51 Mustangs over Berlin on March 6, 1944, marked far more than a simple tactical milestone in one campaign. It was the precise moment when Nazi Germany's fundamental assumptions about the entire war collapsed like a house of cards. The Reich was supposed to be an impregnable fortress, protected by distance and geography. It would be defended by the world's best pilots, flying the world's most advanced fighters. The Mustang shattered every one of these carefully constructed illusions in a single morning of aerial combat. For German leadership, both military and political, it was a moment of terrible clarity that could not be denied. They had based their entire strategic approach on Americans being unable to project effective power across the Atlantic Ocean. They had dismissed American industrial capacity as inefficient and wasteful. They had characterized American technology as inferior to German engineering. They had portrayed American pilots as soft and poorly trained. Every single assumption was completely and utterly wrong. The Mustangs circling over Berlin were undeniable proof that could not be explained away by propaganda or ignored by willful blindness. Adolf Galland would write years later about this pivotal moment in aviation history. March 6, 1944, was the day we lost the war decisively. Not when Berlin fell to Soviet troops, not when Hitler committed suicide in his bunker, but when American fighters appeared over our capital city for the first time. Everything that happened afterward was merely the playing out of a foregone conclusion. The Mustang accomplished far more than defeating the Luftwaffe in aerial combat. It proved beyond any doubt that American industrial democracy could outproduce, out-innovate, and outfight Nazi totalitarianism comprehensively. The psychological impact of this realization rippled through German society like an earthquake. If the regime could not protect Berlin from American fighters, what could it actually do? If everything Germans had been told about American weakness was demonstrably false, what else was fabricated? The Mustang became an unwitting agent of truth. Its presence over German cities provided undeniable proof that the entire Nazi worldview was built upon lies. The Mustang's success came at a terrible cost in young American lives. 2,821 P-51s were lost in combat operations over the European theater. Behind each aircraft loss was a young man who would never return home to his family. The mathematics of victory required this sacrifice, but the human cost remained staggering. The 357th Fighter Group alone lost over 100 pilots killed in action during their combat tour. These represented America's finest young men. College students who had volunteered for combat duty. Athletes who chose military service over professional sports careers. Young professionals who left promising careers to fight for freedom. Lieutenant Colonel Sidney Brooks commanded the 339th Fighter Group with distinction until March 31, 1944. His P-51B was hit by German flak near Brunswick during a bombing escort mission. He was only 28 years old, a married man with 2 children he would never see grow up. His sacrifice was replicated thousands of times across the European theater. Captain Don Gentile became one of the war's most successful Mustang aces, with 21.83 confirmed aerial victories. He survived the war only to die in a flying accident during January 1951 while testing a T-33 jet trainer. The war's echoes continued long after the shooting stopped for many veterans. Many Mustang pilots carried invisible wounds home with them. They struggled with what they had witnessed and done during combat operations. Psychological wounds that never fully healed despite the passage of decades. But their sacrifice achieved something truly remarkable in human history. They had taken the war directly to the enemy's homeland. They had forced the enemy to fight desperate battles over his own territory. They had won decisively through superior technology, training, and industrial support. The Luftwaffe never recovered from the shock of seeing Mustangs over Berlin. From that day forward, it remained a broken force capable only of sporadic, largely ineffective resistance. Individual German pilots continued fighting with desperate courage, but the organization was finished as a coherent fighting force. As dawn broke on May 8, 1945, the day American Mustangs patrolled German skies without opposition. The war in Europe was officially over. No enemy aircraft rose to challenge them. The Luftwaffe that had once terrorized Europe no longer existed as a fighting organization. The aircraft that survived were destroyed or permanently grounded for lack of aviation fuel. The pilots were dead, wounded beyond recovery, or sitting in prisoner of war camps. The entire infrastructure of German military aviation lay in smoking ruins across the defeated nation. The transformation from March 6, 1944 to May 8, 1945 represents one of the most complete military victories in recorded history. Just 14 months had passed between the first Mustang appearance over Berlin and Germany's total surrender. The P-51 had been the primary instrument of that decisive victory. It had transformed Allied air power from a costly liability into an irresistible force that could not be stopped. During those crucial 14 months, Mustang pilots had flown over 213,000 individual combat sorties. They claimed 4,150 confirmed aerial victories in dogfights. They destroyed 4,131 enemy aircraft on the ground during strafing attacks. They dropped 31,000 tons of bombs on strategic targets. They fired 99 million rounds of ammunition at enemy forces. Behind these impressive statistics was a human reality that should never be forgotten. Young American men with an average age of just 22 years flew aluminum aircraft powered by Packard-built Merlin engines. They had systematically and comprehensively destroyed one of history's most formidable air forces through superior technology, training, tactics, and industrial support. They accomplished this victory not through individual heroics, though there was plenty of that. They succeeded through methodical application of overwhelming force backed by American industrial might. Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke commanded some of the war's most successful fighter units. His epitaph for the defeated Luftwaffe captured the essential truth. They were magnificent opponents who fought with incredible courage and skill. They were simply overwhelmed by superior numbers and logistics. We had more of everything that mattered. More aircraft rolling off production lines, more aviation fuel for training and operations, more replacement pilots from training programs, more advanced training for combat operations, more operational range for strategic flexibility. The Mustang gave us the critical ability to apply that numerical superiority anywhere we chose to fight. Once we could escort bombers all the way to Berlin, the mathematics of victory became completely inevitable. When Major Hans Koglers witnessed those first Mustangs over Brandenburg on March 6, 1944, he was observing far more than enemy fighters. He was witnessing the future of aerial warfare being born. The P-51 Mustang had proven conclusively that advanced technology could overcome the protection of distance. It demonstrated that massive industrial capacity could triumph over individual pilot skill and courage. It showed that methodical, systematic approaches could defeat improvised brilliance and desperate innovation. The shocked German pilots encountering Mustangs over Berlin were not simply facing a superior aircraft design. They faced the combined industrial, technological, and organizational power of the United States projected across an ocean and deep into their homeland's heart. It was a demonstration of force that shattered every previous assumption about what was possible in aerial warfare. Hermann Göring's admission about knowing the war was lost when he saw American fighters over Berlin became one of history's most telling acknowledgments of complete defeat. But the full significance of that moment extends far beyond one man's realization or even one nation's military defeat. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin represented a fundamental shift in warfare's basic nature. It marked the moment when air power became truly strategic in scope, when industrial capacity became more important than warrior traditions, when organized efficiency triumphed completely over individual heroism and desperate courage. The German pilots who were shocked by Mustangs over Berlin had witnessed something that would echo through the following decades: the projection of American power across vast distances with devastating precision and overwhelming force. Every modern military intervention has built upon the foundation established when those first Mustangs appeared in Brandenburg's skies. From Korea to Kosovo, from Vietnam to both Gulf Wars, the strategic principles first demonstrated on March 6, 1944, continue shaping military operations worldwide. In the final analysis, the P-51 Mustang accomplished far more than escorting bombers or shooting down German fighters in aerial combat. It shattered the last remaining illusions of a criminal regime built upon lies about racial superiority and national destiny. It proved beyond doubt that free societies, despite their apparent chaos and inefficiency, could organize, innovate, and project power more effectively than totalitarian states. It demonstrated that technology and industry, when properly applied, could overcome any defensive advantage provided by geography or strategic position. The Luftwaffe pilots who looked up in shock at those silver Mustangs on March 6, 1944, were witnessing their own obsolescence. Within 14 months, their entire military organization would be completely destroyed. Their nation would be occupied by former enemies. Their poisonous ideology would be thoroughly discredited before the world. The shock of seeing impossible American fighters over Berlin began a cascade of revelations that ended with Germany's complete defeat and total transformation. Today, preserved P-51 Mustangs still fly at air shows around the world. Their distinctive Merlin engines produce a sound that veterans of that era recognize instantly. For American veterans, it remains the sound of hard-won victory. For surviving German veterans, it is the sound that announced the beginning of their world's end. For military historians, it represents the sound that changed warfare forever. The moment when one nation proved it could project decisive air power anywhere on Earth. The story of Luftwaffe pilots shocked by P-51 Mustangs over Berlin ultimately tells about the collision between cherished assumptions and harsh reality, between elaborate propaganda and simple truth, between what was thought impossible and what American industry made routine and inevitable. When those Mustangs appeared over Berlin, they shocked more than the Luftwaffe pilots who witnessed them. They shocked an entire world view into complete extinction. But from that ideological wreckage, something new and better would eventually rise. Many German pilots who survived the shock of Mustangs over Berlin would help build the post-war Luftwaffe of democratic Germany. They would serve alongside the very nation whose fighters had destroyed their comrades and shattered their former beliefs. Johannes Steinhoff would rise to become Chief of Staff of the new German Air Force. Eventually, he became chairman of the NATO Military Committee. In 1983, he stood beside American generals who had flown Mustangs against him, united in defense of the freedom that his former enemies had ultimately brought to his defeated but redeemed nation. This remarkable transformation from mortal enemies to steadfast allies was perhaps the most profound shock of all. The Mustangs that had appeared over Berlin bringing destruction had ultimately delivered liberation. The German pilots, shocked by their appearance in 1944, would in time understand that those American fighters had freed them from a criminal regime that led their nation to disaster. The final word belongs to Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's general of fighters. He had denied, then witnessed, then somehow survived the complete Mustang onslaught. In 1984, at a reunion of American and German fighter pilots in San Antonio, Texas, he raised a glass to his former enemies. "You were a shock to us when your Mustangs appeared over Berlin. You shocked us with your industrial capacity. Your advanced technology impressed us. Your determination overwhelmed us. But the greatest shock came after the war ended, when you helped us rebuild our shattered nation, when you protected us from Soviet aggression, when you became our trusted friends and allies." The Mustangs over Berlin did not just end a terrible war. They began a lasting peace. For that transformation, we who survived remain forever grateful. The circle had reached completion. The shock that began with Hans Koglers' horrified recognition of American fighters over Brandenburg had transformed through defeat and reconstruction into genuine partnership and lasting friendship. The Mustangs had indeed changed the sky forever. Not just the sky over Berlin on March 6, 1944, but the strategic sky under which all nations have operated ever since. In that fundamental transformation lies the true legacy of the P-51 Mustang, not merely as an instrument of military victory, but as a catalyst for the post-war world order that followed. The shock experienced by Luftwaffe pilots in March 1944 could never have imagined the outcome. The American fighters destroying their air force would ultimately lead to their nation's redemption and integration into a community of democratic nations dedicated to freedom. Yet that is exactly what happened through the following decades. The Mustangs that shocked the Luftwaffe over Berlin did not simply win a war. They helped secure a peace that has endured for 8 decades of prosperity and freedom. In the end, that achievement may represent their greatest victory of all.